I'd like to talk to you about something that's probably more important than anything that has touched this country in generations, and that's our inability to produce our own energy. As you know, we use about 6.5 billion barrels of oil in this country every year. About 4 billion of those barrels come from off our shores. Some of it comes from my neighbors in Alberta. They are good trading partners. They are our friends, and we can count on Alberta. But after Alberta, these trading partners, Venezuela, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Angola, Nigeria. Are you getting the picture? These are not our friends, and many of them are run by dictators, people who don't share our way of life. They, in fact, many of them receive large numbers of dollars every time you fill up your car with gasoline, and some of that money is making it to the pockets of terrorists who would like to destroy our way of life. I submit to you the most important issue of this time and the next generation and the generation after is creating energy independence. Now, we're all looking at each other shell-shocked. How can we get there? As you know, going back all the way to 1948 when we tipped the balance. It was 1948 when we began to consume more oil than we could produce in this country. And it was during the Carter administration we moaned that 40% of the oil we consume is imported. And then, when there was the Arab embargo, price of fuel went up, there were gas lines, and we were committed at that time. You remember those times? Jimmy Carter said, we have to conserve energy. We have to produce our own energy. And so there were a lot of ideas in the late 70s. Coal gasification was one of them. Wind power was one of them. Biofuels and conservation was the lead. I'd like to talk to you about some of those today. Remember our problem? 4 billion barrels of imported oil. Let us assume that we can continue to produce 2.5 billion barrels domestically. I think that we can do that. In Montana, we are one of the 2 states that actually increased our oil production during the last 12 months. We'll do our part in gas and oil, but there's more to do. I think we heard the President say a few months ago, he leaned into the podium in a very serious way, and he looked at every one of us in our living rooms, and he said, we are addicted to oil. I'll be damned. Who knew? Of course we're addicted to oil. But you see, addiction is a cure that takes 12 steps. The first step in breaking the addiction is to admit that you have the addiction. So we've done one. We've got 11 more to go, and I'd like to talk about the 11 steps to energy independence. The first is conservation. Remember, we have a 4 billion barrel problem. I think that you can decrease your consumption of energy by 1 billion barrels. That's some 16% of the total. Now, there are some smart economists here, and as you know, you could lay economists head to toe, all the economists in the world, and they wouldn't reach a conclusion. They'll say to you, oh my gosh, everyone knows if you study the economies of the world that those economies who use the most energy are those economies that are the wealthiest. So if you're asking us to decrease the amount of oil that we consume, you're asking us to contract our economy, and I'm not saying that at all. In fact, if you look at the period between 1975 and 1983, we decreased our consumption of oil by 17% and grew our economy by 27%. We've done this before. Now, how do we do this? Where do we start? Jimmy Carter was a visionary, but he asked America to sacrifice. We're not good at sacrifice. He wore a sweater, asked us to wear sweaters, and turned the temperature down. He asked us to sacrifice. That doesn't work in America. We like hope and opportunity. What we have to challenge Americans to do is to make conservation cool. A few months ago, Nancy and I, my wife, were having dinner with a group of folks at the governor's mansion, and we drive a Volkswagen Jetta that runs on crops. I'm going to show you some of these crops here in a little bit. We get 43 miles per gallon, and it's run 100% on biodiesel. So I like to brag about that car, and that we're raising our crops in Montana and running this car. And there were some other couples that were having dinner with us that evening. One of them said, we bought a hybrid car, and we get 51 miles per gallon. I said, that's cooler than us. And then someone else at the party said, we bought a hybrid car, but we share that with our neighbor. We drive it 3 days a week, they drive it 3 days a week, and we leave it in the garage 1 day a week. Cooler yet, I said. And then the last couple that was there, they said, well, in our family, we ride bicycles. So we bolted our bicycles together and we made a family bicycle. Coolest yet. If we challenge Americans to challenge each other and we make conservation cool, you bet we can decrease our consumption by 1 billion barrels. That's 16, 17%. We did it in the 70s, we can do it again. If we make conservation cool and we challenge the ingenuity of American scientists and consumers and marketers, we can decrease our consumption by 1 billion barrels.